All right, YouTube, this is going to be about why I feel that Barack Obama should be impeached. First, to preface this, I will say me saying this doesn't make me some sort of neocon for several reasons I can point out. First, those few that remember my older channel, circa early 2007, will remember that there was a great deal of material there dedicated to attacking George Bush. That essentially the reason that I think Obama's a failure has nothing to do with, oh, he's black, oh, he's a Democrat, oh, he's a liberal, or any of these other things. And I agree with him in spirit on some issues, but simply because over time, Obama, the reason he was voted for in the first place is that people had suffered through 8 years of Bush. They saw Bush as inept, as corrupt. They saw the Republican leadership in Congress much the same way. And they got tired of it. And they voted for Obama largely for two reasons. One, they remembered how bad Bush was. And two, McCain picked an unelectable running mate. And I still maintain that McCain he probably still would have lost, but he would have come a lot closer to winning the presidency if he had chosen somebody other than Sarah Palin. That was a terrible mistake. As soon as he chose Sarah Palin, I said, okay, the gig's up. There's no way that Obama's going to lose now because friggin' McCain may be halfway decent on some issues, but Palin's way out there, and she's not even out in the far outfield. She's outside of the stand. She's outside of the stadium entirely. That's how weird her views are. And she couldn't speak very well either and kept tripping up, sort of pulling a Biden every other day. That didn't help either. The reason that I would support impeachment for Obama is this. First, to actually executing the law. And I'll point out immigration. Now, first, I'll preface this too by saying I agree in spirit more with the more liberal members of the Democratic Party on immigration than I do any member of the GOP. I'm not for I'll differ from the other libertarians in that I don't support a completely open border, but I think the process of immigrating to this country has been made artificially difficult. I was married to somebody who was from Mexico. I've seen all the immigration papers. I've read the forms. It's an arcane, confusing, lengthy, sometimes costly, and rather strange process. Most of the material doesn't really make sense, and what you're left with is a system where if somebody's being imported as migrant labor to do jobs that the ordinary American wouldn't be willing to do, like pick strawberries for sub-minimum wage, or picking apples or cleaning out the gutters, they can get into the country. But the thing is, if somebody has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or something, they don't want that kind of job because they can get a better job than that in their home country. And then there are skilled individuals which get in fairly easily, especially if they've studied in the United States at all on a student visa. If you've got a PhD in medicine or something comparable to that, you probably can get into the United States fairly easily. And then there's everybody else. The problem being that everybody else group that includes a lot of talented individuals that could add a lot to this country and have every reason to want to come in here includes people with lower than PhD level degrees or lower than master's level degrees. It includes people who are they might not be fully fluent. They might have some difficulty with English fluency, but otherwise they might be a genius. It includes people who want to come to this country for romantic reasons. It includes people who may have been in this country anyway for an extended period of time under their parents' visa and turn 18 and don't continue on here, get sent back, and then are ineligible to enter the country again. It's a very, very, very confusing process. And what you're left with is a lot of people simply immigrate illegally because they don't necessarily have any other options. Now, I look at the United States and I say it was built by immigrants anyway. And until fairly recently in our history, unless you were a communist or had tuberculosis, you could immigrate. And it wasn't that big a deal. Only recently do we have this being used as a wedge issue. But here's the thing. Here's why I think Obama should be considered impeachable on this issue. I may agree with Obama that we should grant some level of amnesty to nonviolent illegal immigrants. I may agree with Obama that we need severe immigration reform. I may even agree with Obama that the Republicans have stonewalled it, and that it would largely be a good thing if we did implement some level of reform. But he does not make the law. He's the President of the United States. He's part of the executive branch. He's not in the legislature. It's not his responsibility to pick and choose which laws to enforce. Those remain the laws. He may disagree with it. The majority of the US population may disagree with it. I disagree with it. But it's still the law as it's been written. It is an impeachable offense, in the most clear sense. The second would be on something like the Bergdahl trade. Now, let's leave all of the, is Bergdahl a deserter, is Bergdahl a good person, is the Taliban a terrorist group or a militant group or insurgent? Let's leave all that bickering behind and not consider it. Let's assume that Bergdahl is simply a generic stand-in for any soldier that might have been a POW, and we'll assume for the purposes of this that he was and that he didn't desert. Obama broke the law. And he came out with an excuse that, to his understanding, this rider on the bill that he signed that requires congressional notification is unconstitutional. So he's basically saying it's unconstitutional, so it doesn't really matter. The problem is this: the president, again, this is a violation of executive power. The president doesn't determine whether the law is unconstitutional. Only the Supreme Court can do that. If the president was able to declare a law unconstitutional and unilaterally reject its very existence, can you imagine the sort of things that would have happened under the Bush administration? We have the checks and balances in place. We have separation of these powers in place specifically so they don't get abused. The president doesn't determine whether a law is unconstitutional until the Supreme Court weighs in, if it ever does, on this specific bill. It remains law. It remains enforced, it remains valid, because the legislature proposed it, passed it through. Obama himself signed it. Obama was the one that signed this bill. Now, he can put a signing statement on there and say, to my knowledge, this is unconstitutional, if he wants. That doesn't render it unconstitutional. The court did not decide that. Only Obama is saying that. But it doesn't matter. The president has absolutely zero authority to declare a law unconstitutional. The legislature couldn't do it. The court is the one that declares the law unconstitutional. Third, I would say this would fall vaguely under the blanket of impeachable offenses, lying repeatedly to the American public. The reason why that doesn't really factor in is that Bush did the same thing, Clinton did the same thing, Reagan, Bush daddy, all the presidents have done the same thing. We should be holding these people, as well as the legislature, in the end the Supreme Court as well, to a higher standard of honesty, to a higher standard of ethics than we currently do. I think what we've done as a country, and it shows in elections too, is instead of choosing the greater of two goods, we choose the lesser of two evils, which is morally reprehensible that we're willing to do that. We're not willing to vote for a third-party candidate or Mickey Mouse or something like that. It's reprehensible that people get into this football team mentality of D&R, Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, Christian, non-Christian, black, white, whatever. These are wedge issues. They don't really matter. The two parties largely are the same at this point on most issues. So even if I agree with Obama on some issues, including ones where he has potentially rendered himself impeachable, even if I happen to agree with him on those issues, like I do largely with immigration, he still violated the law. He violated the separation of powers. The executive branch does not get to pick and choose which laws it enforces. Because once those bills have been signed, it becomes the responsibility of the executive branch to do so. The president doesn't have to like it. He can come out every day on TV if he wants and say immigration needs reform. Well, our immigration policy is bullshit. Congress needs to stop dragging its heels. And I would agree with him every step of the way, but he still has to enforce it while the laws are the way that they are. So I would say Obama should be impeached. I thought Bush should be impeached as well. He did similar things. And and here's one thing I wanted to leave people with. It's gotten to the point now, and I've seen this 5 or 6 times just in the last week alone, where people who support Obama, and it's a dwindling number that do, are now comparing him to Bush. Now, in what alternate universe does it make sense for a person who's presumably liberal in nature, presumably a Democrat, at least to some extent, probably voted for Obama? I voted for Obama, big mistake. In what alternate universe does it make sense to favorably compare him with somebody like Bush? That's like saying this turd stinks less than the other, so it's okay. Bush is remembered as being at the very least a poor president, if not, and most people would agree with the latter, an absolute failure, who got us involved in several catastrophic wars, crushed the economy, and managed to make a laughingstock of this country to the entire rest of the world, while alienating half of our allies and at least making them suspicious of our actions. And they're comparing Obama to Bush. Why? This shows the desperation. They say, well, on any of these things that Bush and Obama have in common where they've both screwed up, they'll say, well, Bush did it too. Well, that's not saying much because these same people despise Bush. Bush is remembered as a failed president. So when somebody who supports Obama comes out online or in the media or anywhere else and says, well, Bush did this too, you're drawing a comparison between a president you acknowledge as a complete failure and one that you support. That doesn't sound very good, and the reason why they're doing this is that there's no other contemporary example of a president that acts the way these two jackasses did. The way Bush did and the way Obama does. There's no contemporary example because Clinton was dishonest. Clinton was pandering. Clinton apparently liked to have sex with everything that moved. But Clinton is remembered as a halfway decent president. Even Jimmy Carter, for all of his problems, is not remembered as bad a president as Bush and Obama now. Obama managed to be elected by a massive, massive majority, especially among the youth, and quickly dashed that majority down to nothing by being so inept that he turned a larger amount of political capital than Bush ever had when he took office, and almost as much as he had right after 9/11 when he gave a few soaring speeches and had something like 80% approval. He's managed to take that political capital and dumb it down to next to nothing. He's hovering around maybe 40% approval at this point, which is terrible considering he's not even halfway through his second term. I think Obama should be impeached, and the reason I say this is not because it would get me off because he's a Democrat or because he's black and therefore I'm racist or any of these other things. He broke the law, and he's failing to uphold other laws, which are impeachable offenses. And it's about time, and I don't think the GOP will do any better, and I will admit this to people, but we still need to hold Obama as the highest ranking individual in the government, the figurehead of the United States, accountable for what he does. And it would leave, yes, Biden in charge. He might be impeached too, subsequently, or he might just be a lame duck and do absolutely nothing other than pull a Gerald Ford and pardon Obama for any crimes he may have committed. Ford did that for Nixon, and everyone was like, what the fuck? I'm sure that Biden would show Obama the same courtesy minutes after taking the oath. But he should be impeached. Bush should have been impeached. We missed our opportunity to hold him accountable. Things would be, I think, somewhat different now if we had impeached Bush. Cheney would have to be impeached literally minutes later, before he even takes the oath, or literally right after he should have been impeached. But it's sad, because we shouldn't be settling. Sorry, my allergies are acting up a little bit this afternoon. We shouldn't be settling for the lesser of two evils. We should be able to choose between two or more greater goods in this country. I think that with anti-government sentiment and dissatisfaction with DC at an all-time high, it's about time that some of these smaller parties, doesn't matter which one, Libertarian, Green, Constitutionalist, fucking Pirate Party USA, it doesn't matter which ones rise up, just to have something to counterbalance these two totally inept parties that currently they only compete across the board with each other, and they share 90% of their beliefs in common. There are no good ideas right now coming out of DC because there are no new ideas. The two parties are still where they have been for decades. They feel no need to change because they know that right now Americans are going to choose between these two parties. They're not going to vote for a libertarian or someone in the Green Party or an independent candidate who has admittedly superior ideas because they'll say, well, they can't win. Well, I voted Republican last time and I'm going to vote Democrat this time because magically that will make things better. Or I voted Democrat last time, I'll vote Republican this time and things will magically get better. No, it fucking won't. We tried that when Bush was president. We tried that when we got Obama involved. And if we were to vote the GOP into power in 2016, it'll be the same thing. There are no candidates that are considering running on either side that have good ideas. There are none. Look at the people that they are considering to run. Hillary Clinton, fucking Rand Paul, Ted Cruz. Who has good ideas? Marco Rubio? Does he have a Jeb Bush? A third Bush in office. I'm sure that would be a great time. Hillary would be just as bad, a second Clinton in office. Who has good ideas? Which of these people are honestly worth voting for? And yet they still enjoy the support of a proportion of the population that thinks, well, this time they'll be honest. As though the last, 40 presidents in a row haven't shown you that's not the case. We haven't had sound government in this country since the 1700s when you really think about it. Essentially, there have been a few decent presidents since then, but look who we're left with. Ted Cruz is no, George Washington. Hillary Clinton is no Thomas Jefferson. Not by far. They couldn't even compete with some of the presidents we had like Eisenhower or Kennedy. They certainly can't compete with like Teddy Roosevelt or Lincoln. And they sure as hell can't compete with the founders that actually got into that office. Why are we settling for these people? We should kick Obama out. We should kick Biden out. We should essentially kick all incumbents out. We should have just an anti-incumbent movement, shake them up, and see if that works. And if that doesn't work, we should abandon those two parties entirely. At this point, after seeing the ineptitude of Bush and Obama, you would think there would be zero support left for either of these parties. You would think that people would have wised up by now and said both parties are fundamentally corrupt, fundamentally incapable of governing this country, fundamentally filled with people who are backed by a group of extremely rich oligarchic corporate individuals and insiders within DC and Wall Street, bankers and so forth, and political heads, the political families and old money that have been there for centuries. And they are fundamentally incapable of governing the country. And Obama is no different. The fact that he happens to have black skin means nothing. He's still distantly related to all the others, including Bush. And people were willing to overlook that and say, well, maybe this time we've got our first black president. He's young, he's well-spoken, maybe he'll be different. Guess what? He wasn't. He's arguably an even worse failure than Bush. As a recent poll that was just out a couple days ago suggests that people now look at Obama as worse than George W. Bush. George W., Satan incarnate, the destroyer of the United States, the terrorizer of liberty, the godfather of everything wrong with this country. And Obama is looked at now, because he has done such a piss-poor job, as worse than George W. Bush. And people still support these two idiotic parties. Well, let me tell you, go ahead and vote for whoever you want, because it doesn't matter who you vote for. Your vote counts. In the strictest sense, yes, your vote counts, but the problem is you're voting for shitty candidates. If I put two dog turds in front of you, and I said pick one and eat it, wouldn't you be kind of pissed off? That's exactly what you do when you go to the booth and you check off this candidate or that candidate because, oh, well, they have a D, so they must be all right. Well, R stands for really nifty and D stands for decent. No, it doesn't. R stands for retarded and D stands for damnation. The two-party system has failed. Now, I've known that for years, but of course there are still people who don't seem to understand that. There are people who say, well, Rand Paul will save us. No, Hillary will save us. No, they're not. They don't care about you. They just care about their wallets and their business partners. And people are too dumb to understand that fact. I wish I could get all of everybody in the United States, just for 5 minutes, to listen to somebody who's saying exactly that and see what happens. I guarantee all the Comcast and all these other groups would shut it down in a minute because they'd be like, oh no, the people that we're bankrolling are going to lose. Uh, it's bullshit. D and R mean nothing after a person's name, and Obama should be held accountable for his actions. And not everyone calling for him to be impeached is some sort of T-Billy right-wing extreme evangelical gun-toting racist. Just like not everybody calling for Bush's impeachment was a pot-smoking liberal hippie who lives in a tent. Just not the case. Those stereotypes are put out there by the media in an effort to keep you voting for one of the two major parties because they know whoever wins, they're getting paid. They do not care. They ultimately care absolutely not at all who you vote for because the two parties are under the thumb of these same bankers and businessmen and lobbies and unions and old political money. And they're all in it together. They may have a happy competition with one another to see whose candidate can win. But guess what? Goldman Sachs funds both sides. All the other businesses and banks do too. So have fun voting, uh, you know, because it doesn't ultimately matter. It only matters in the literal sense, but fundamentally, it doesn't. That's about all. Peace out.